In America, we love us some salt. It's a staple on every dining table and spice cabinet, no matter how much melanin or lack of melanin you have. Everyone at least has salt at their disposal. When we want to be healthy, we go for the low sodium option. In the classic documentary Super Size Me, Morgan Spurlock famously showed us that even the salads at McDonald's have salt in them. We cannot escape it, and we still love it, even though it is unfortunately causing health problems in our population. Well, believe it or not, in the animal kingdom, they love their sodium chloride even more. It is a hit with herbivores like deer, moose, squirrels, goats, and buffalo. But they don't use it to season their delicious grass fillet. They actually need it to survive. And unlike us humans who only need to walk to the kitchen or the corner store to get it, these animals will travel miles for that fix. Mineral licks, or colloquially called salt licks, are naturally occurring mineral deposits that animals lick to gain essential nutrients. These deposits can be found in various locations like soil, rock formations, and the banks of rivers and streams. These deposits can contain phosphorus, sodium, calcium, iron, and zinc, all which support bone and muscle health in animals. They aren't just drawn to the salt for taste like us, they actually rely on the nutrients for their health. Because these minerals are essential to their survival, it is said that these animals can detect these deposits from miles and miles away. Pretty incredible if you ask me. So why are we learning about animals and their eating habits? Well, it comes into play when we examine the history of transportation in the US. A crazy fact I learned recently was that the genesis of America's early road network in the colonial era and pre-colonial era was mineral deposits. I'll explain. I don't know much about buffalo, and I'll be using the terms buffalo and bison here interchangeably in this episode, so all you zoologists out there, please give me some slack. But two things I do know about buffalo, aka bison, are they travel in herds, and two, they are not what you would consider light of foot. Scores of buffalo weighing about a ton each, traversing the landscape, are not exactly what you would call a stealth operation. Over time, the periodic migration of bison and other animals to these salt licks created worn and well-established trails. These trails, or traces, could span hundreds of miles. Native Americans were known to be very familiar with these trails and used them to both hunt the animals on them and for their own travel and navigation. Upon European colonization in the Americas, the Native American trails were then used by settlers for their own navigation. Eventually, these roads were incorporated into early cities' street networks when they were laid out, and then eventually paved over. These roads formed the inspiration for the state highway and U.S. interstate network, as the highways in many places followed or replaced the long-standing roads that had been used for centuries. So when you're driving down the highway stuck in traffic, you can thank those buffalo for their little salt addiction. Okay, maybe a bit of exaggeration there, but you get the point. One of the best and most fascinating examples of the phenomenon I've described is the Salt Lick Trail known as the Vincennes Trace. The trace was a trail made and used by millions of buffalo spanning from Kentucky through Indiana to Illinois. The buffalo traveled from Salt Lick to Salt Lick over hundreds of years and wore down a trail about 12 to 20 feet wide. This trail was used by Native Americans and eventually by European settlers. It became one of the most important routes of travel from Kentucky to Illinois and subsequent Western territories. Development eventually sprang up around the trail and became crucial to settlers in southern Indiana. Once the trail got to Illinois, it split in two and the northern half extended to what is now Chicago. I'm assuming most of you have not heard of the Vincennes Trace before this, but Chicago natives and resident Southsiders might have heard of the street that bears its name. Yes, Vincennes Avenue follows the original course and is simply a paved over version of the old street, of the old trace. Vincennes starts near 69th Street and the Dan Ryan Expressway and runs south, but it doesn't run a perfect vertical line like the rest of Chicago's street grid. It runs diagonal to the southwest, suggesting it was a thoroughfare before the uniform street grid was laid out. Vincennes Avenue continues on several miles southwest to the community of Blue Island, Illinois, which was a major waypoint or stopping point on the trace. And it's situated about a day's travel from Chicago. In the old days before cars, that was about a day's travel. The name of the city comes from the hill or ridge that the town was settled on, as it was said to be an island in the middle of the uniform prairie sea of the area. One thing I love is investigating why cities were settled and what their competitive advantage was that caused them to grow. Proximity to the trace and the many travelers who used it was big business during this era. More on this later. After state-funded straightening of the trace, parts further to the north of current Vincennes Avenue became State Street. Not only is State Street home to the famous Chicago Theater, it is also the center of the Chicago address and street grid, with all the addresses to the west receiving a west designation and all the addresses to the east receiving an east designation. For example, East 14th Street or West Roosevelt Avenue. This is truly fascinating to me that a buffalo and Native American trail became the iconic State Street in Chicago. As much as this country has tried to remove Native Americans from our history, their legacy is staring us right in the face. Perhaps no place is more synonymous with the city than Chicago and Wrigley Field, home to the Chicago Cubs. If you've ever been to a game, you've stood at the corner of Clark and Addison Streets. Addison runs perfectly straight from east to west. Clark does not. Why? That's right, you guessed it. Clark Street is the descendant of another Native American trail. Perhaps a key giveaway is the fact that it runs diagonal and then more of a curve as it gets through the north part of Chicago. The current paved version follows an unpaved version used by Native Americans and then subsequently by European settlers. The original name of Clark Street is Green Bay Road because it literally was the road used to go from Fort Dearborn in downtown Chicago to Fort Howard in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Bears fans aren't going to like that one. Portions of the road outside the city limits still retain the original name. And Chicago isn't the only city that still has the legacy of Native American trails. Thespians around the world should be happy that a Wickwashek, you heard me right, aka a local Native American tribe, Wickwashek, a footpath connecting island villages was incorporated into the street grid, because who could imagine New York City without the world-famous Broadway? New Yorkers will notice that Broadway is one of the few streets that doesn't run perfectly vertical or horizontal, but rather runs in a winding route from the Lower East Side to the Upper West Side and eventually Harlem, indicating it was a major thoroughfare before the Commissioner's Plan of 1811 laid out the famous street grid as we know it today. The original Broadway would have been more convenient and efficient than a perfectly straight route, as pre-colonial era Manhattan was a very hilly island with numerous streams and other obstacles. Therefore, utilizing the tried and true Native American footpath was the best option to traverse the island. Let's digest some other examples of the natural environment, allowing a settlement to thrive and grow. Cities rarely grow magically. There's usually some competitive advantage that they have over the other nearby cities, compelling people to move there, spend there, start a business there. If you're interested in a deep dive on this, I would highly recommend you revisit my episode on Chicago versus water and the economics of location and competitive advantage. Historically, early settlers often started towns around these salt licks. One in southern Indiana was started as a French trading post near a salt lick and sulfur spring. While it supported a lot of wildlife over the years, this town eventually became known for a notable bird, as in Basketball Hall of Famer Larry Bird, aka the Hick from French Lick, who left as the high school's all-time leading scorer. But now let's focus on this idea from the context of the Vincennes Trace. Vincennes, Indiana, is a town most have probably never heard of before now unless you're from the area. Yes, it gains its name from the previously discussed Vincennes Trace. Vincennes was a town established in southwest Indiana where the Trace meets the Wabash River, and originally used as a fur trading post for, you guessed it, buffalo hides. The state's strategic location along a river and a trail, two major forms of transportation in that day, allowed it to be a place where people could stop for services and trade. Thus, it grew as a town. Another example is a place everyone has heard of, but probably very few know how exactly its unique location contributed to its founding and growth as a city. Louisville, Kentucky. While we could go back and forth over the pronunciation, it's Louisville and not Louisville. Don't at me. It's a better use for a time to digest its origin. Louisville is located at the falls of the Ohio River, which in the 1700s and early 1800s was the only real barrier for those sailing the Ohio River, from the interior of the Ohio River Valley down to the Mississippi River and eventually Gulf of Mexico. The falls were not what you would immediately think of like the massive drop of Niagara Falls, rather a series of descending rapids over the course of a few miles. But they were still steep and dangerous. The town developed as a portage point and place where people could use local expertise on how to traverse the falls, and it grew from there. A portage is a short distance where one literally picks up their boat and walks from one body of water to the next. So where did the Trace come in? Well, the falls are where buffalo crossed the Ohio River because it was a shallower point to cross for them. Native Americans followed suit and crossed there as well. Countless fossils have been found at the falls and is currently a state park because of all the activity it has seen from all forms of life over the many centuries. I really like the idea of local expertise being so in demand and a reason for a place to grow. Before GPS and the internet, we really had to rely on other human beings' lived experiences to stay alive and make it to our destination safely. I like the idea of early residents of Louisville dedicating their life to be an expert in navigating the one obstacle. An expert in helping their fellow man. For a fee, I'm sure, but you get my gist. A local lending their expertise to help travelers arrive at their destination safely. That's what you call the Navigator, right? I'm Richard Norwood, and thanks for joining us on today's episode of The Navigator. History shows us that we've always needed stewards who will guide us through unfamiliar territory and teach us the lay of the land. So I hope you'll continue to join us as we shed light on the natural and built environment, and a life lesson or two along the way. Stay the course, friends.